Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the IWillAim podcast. Our topic for today is navigating the marketing maze with Joe Madnani. Joe is an award winning marketing leader whose journey from India to United States includes more than just successful career. Her life and work reflect the rich tapestry of the Indian immigrant experience intertwined with inescapable gender and race dynamic. Her first foray into US was Fort Lauderdale in the early 2000s. She moved to the Northeast in 2012. Her nonlinear trajectory is punctuated with many pivots, most important one being a parent. For over 2 decades, Joe's entrepreneurial, creative, and multidisciplinary approach has earned her recognition and awards in advertising by the American Advertising Federation. Beyond her day job, she has contributed to the fashion and lifestyle press in India and in Florida, including Midday Times of India and the Miami Herald, along with local Florida magazine. Presently, Joe continues to partner with brands and agency and is serving as a mentor for Asian in advertising. She's working on getting a collective of poems published that reflects her life experience as an immigrant. If the book had a tagline, it would be for outlier everywhere who feel like they don't belong. Welcome, Joe. How are you doing today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I'm very excited to be here.
You're welcome. Let's dive into the topic. How can a business effectively measure an ROI on a marketing campaign?
So, I'm not a management guru, but there's one classic piece of wisdom that I hold on to, and that is you cannot measure what you cannot manage.
Mm,
So, or I think it's the other way around. I might be totally goofing this up, but you get the gist of it. So, I always feel like businesses can thrive by having a continuous test and learn mindset because it's no longer rigid. It's not like, oh, I bought like $1 million of TV ads, and now it's so fluid. And you can lean on automation. You can see what's performing well, and there's creative A/B testing, but there's also testing on how is the audience responding to this, and do I need to optimize any language? Do I need to make my offer better? Of course, keeping an eye out on the competition. So in the past days of marketing, marketing managers would or directors or CMOs would set and forget a campaign and say, "This is my annual budget. This is what I got to do." You cannot do that anymore because now we have. I think there's two aspects to it. One is really making sure the strategy is adapting to the context we're in, and two is leaning on the data. So really figuring out how fluid the execution can be using wisdom from that's being fed in real time by data. And simplistically, it's not as simple, but it's like always keep investing in what's working. So if you know a particular way is working with your audience, lean more into that and hedge data informed bets. That's the key.
well, thank you for sharing how you actually measure a ROI. Next question is, we talk about data a little bit and how measurement of data is very important, but I want to talk about the data analytic aspect. How does it plays into the impact of a marketing campaign?
Oh my God. Thank you for bringing that. And such a perfect segue to what we were just discussing earlier. So I think data we are very fortunate to have access to two kinds of data. So one is your proactive data, which, in marketing especially, I love predictive analytics. You can look at a consumer journey and you can predict what their buying behavior will be or how they're responding to campaigns. The other is reactive. So it's after the fact. Like, did that actually bring in any revenue? Or not, I mean, not just revenue, it's not so transactional, but also did it amp up my favorite? Did it amp up the
Hmm.
brand love? Like whatever we did, because it's not all rainbows and unicorns, right? For brands, sometimes there are crises and brands have to
Yeah.
show up for their audiences like, hey, take a stand. So some of that aspect happens in the reactive side of it. How did the consumers view the brand? How much are they going to be loyal to it? Is there enough love there? So in that way, analytics play a very, very big role in the success of a campaign. or failure, because they impact clarity on what matters and ultimately what works from a success and revenue standpoint. So revenue is one piece, but there's also the resonance, like how is the brand being able to survive in this environment.
I think resonance is key, right, for success of a particular campaign. Thank you for highlighting that. Next question, I want to kind of deep dive on storytelling. I love storytelling because when you do storytelling, people remember it and it lasts longer in memory than teaching someone something. So, what are some of the tips for building a compelling brand narratives?
So I have to say, not to be biased, but this is my absolute favorite question because I am a storyteller. So I think brand storytelling, right, is it's quintessential to anything because that is it's almost like that's your ethos as a brand.
Hmm.
So I view it as a way for a brand to stay true to what it is, and it sort of becomes a north star. That's the place where all creation of campaigns starts. So I'm afraid to use the word purpose in this context because purpose has various meanings. But for the narrative, I think there are three tips. Again, threes. There are three tips I have. So first is to really drill down on what is making a brand unique. Because in today's day and age, everybody wants value. So it's like, what value is being presented by the brand that a customer can't get elsewhere? And it
Hmm.
doesn't matter about the price and all, because look, if I am now completely invested in a brand, yes, the competition will matter to me, but because I'm a loyalist, I want to make sure that I keep coming back for more. So what is that essence? I think the narrative leads to that, finding that insight, that essence. The second is narrative and execution. Sometimes, at least in the past, when people had big budgets and when things were more traditional, in my opinion, my humble opinion, I thought there was a difference. There's a church and state equation going on. Oh, this is the narrative, but the tactics are completely different. So I've always had a problem with that. I think that the execution should be fluid enough to reflect the narrative in big ways and small. So even if it's a tactic, it should be a reflection of what you have now culled down as a strategist in the narrative. Because that narrative is not something fancy that I wrote over a cup of coffee, but it's backed by research, right? There's a lot of
Hmm.
research that goes into how a brand narrative comes along. There's a lot of psychographic and cultural context. So I think that drilling it down and making sure that the tactics are also reflective of that strategy is important. And lastly, a narrative is not something that you can lock in and write in stone, because if you have a new competitor, then that narrative is going to be updated. If you have a new way the customer is behaving, or some sea change happen with innovation, then you have to pivot. So my favorite example of an innovative brand is, Apple. I mean, they were the first with the internet phone, but some of the other brands, they took their own sweet time and they didn't get quite caught up. Before that, it was BlackBerry. People were like,
Yep.
"Oh, I can send an email with my BlackBerry," but Apple changed it all. Now you have your whole universe in your pocket. So I think that learning from it's a big example, but even in smaller categories and smaller ways, you have to keep an eye out on what's next. And not so much from the brand standpoint, but how is it going to help my consumer at the end of it? So keep the strategy flexible, make sure it's reflected in the tactics, and keep the execution very agile. It's not church and state. You have to go back to it. So that's how I view a brand narrative.
Wow, that's a lot. One thing that I really like when you first started is you need to stick to your brand ethos, right? Like I said, you didn't want to use the word purpose, but really it's do your brand ethos and stick to it. And the other one that I really like hit home to me is really understanding, the value proposition that you bring to the market. And last but not the least, it's not like you said it and forget it. You need to watch it because just like your explanation, they disrupt the industry significantly, and a lot of companies are just watching. Like Nokia fell off the face of the earth. I remember early on. if you have a Nokia, you're like the in thing, right? And then the
Yes.
BlackBerry came, and because they didn't innovate, they really like fall behind. Apple seized the moment, and that's go back to what you said. Is really looking at the data and analyzing and look at how the market respond to you and innovate. And that's an amazing story about Apple that you shared. Thank you for doing that. Next question I had is: we're living in a society with multiple generation. How does how do you adapt a strategy that appeals to maybe not all of them, but most of them?
This is something that I have been fascinated with, and At, thank you for that question, by the way. And there are times where, well, I've questioned my own life choices. I keep telling myself, why am I not a strategist? Because the whole ethnographic piece really fascinates me, and how that impacts branding. So, um, diving into unique psychographics is one way to do it. It's the simplest
Mm,
way to do it, because each generation is driven by different values.
yes.
uh, so Gen Z, they are very they are different. They are not attracted to logo name brands. They're not attracted to all these lofty promises that you and I are used to. I mean, I'm Gen X, so I'm very attracted by all of
Same
that.
here.
But I have a daughter who's Gen Z, and she's not into, she's very minimalist. She's not into logos. She's very aware about climate change and things like that. And she will purposefully she'll shop accordingly. So I think it's reflected in that her purchasing behavior is very different than mine. So also where they get their information, right? So Gen Z, when they shop, they like to see what their peers are saying. So it's TikTok beauty and it's TikTok this, and everything is, if they have an influencer that they resonate with, they will buy that face mask. They will buy
Mm,
that, they will follow that health hack. So their consumption habits matter. Now, when it comes to the millennials, they also follow different values, but they like to have these creative, interactive experiences. They like brands to interact with them in a way, and they stick to what they know. They like value based techniques. So it's like, oh, you save X amount of money, or they have certain quirks. Like if you remember a few years ago, the whole joke on the millennials was the avocado toast and the coffee, and like they're very, specific about their preferences. And then, Gen X, people like me, I like very loyalty based marketing. I don't like the jargon. I mean, as a marketer, I hate jargon, but I like it when brands reward me for my loyalty. So I go back for more. Boomers, on the other hand, they love researching, and they still are glued into the traditional media. You have the grandparents on Facebook who comment on every cute picture you post, but then their purchasing doesn't come from there. So I think that how people like to receive their information, number one, you have to meet them there. And number two is really about, it's really about understanding what they respond to, and you have to create those brand experiences. Like Gen Z, they don't like to post, they don't like their posts to keep floating around the ether. They like ephemeral content. So that's why Snapchat is a complete hit with Gen Z, because they're like, it's done, I don't want everybody to see what I'm doing. So brands really get very creative on Snapchat, and they create these filters and immersive experiences, and that's how Gen Z shops. So I think that first, understanding the unique psychographics, and second is, there is still a very thin thread that binds all the generations. And again, that's going back to what you said earlier, was authenticity. No one, literally no one in all of these subgroups wants to be sold to. No one wants the flashy mess. Now
mm.
it's like, you can take a cultural moment, you can make it relatable, and then you have somebody's attention. So I think authenticity and personalization is a common thread that binds, but really getting into their behavior and getting down to their level and feeding them that cultural craziness that they want is where the magic is. Again,
Wow,
goes
thank
back
you
to
for explaining how we connect with a different generation. It's very complex, in my opinion. It's very complex, but thank you for helping peeling the onion a little bit for my audience. Now, I want to give you some opportunity to tell our audience how do they reach out to you when they listen to the episode and they absolutely love it. How do they reach out to you?
So my website is www.theideaisin.com, like the doctor is in. So I'm like, the idea is in. And same, my email is an epimonus. So the idea is in at gmail.com. If you have any questions or if I can help you with anything. And Will, I know you said that I could share something. So I have a nice infographic of a branding framework that I can email you that you can share with the listeners. Just That's just how I think about branding. And you can apply that to marketing a product or marketing yourself as a personal brand, but I use that extensively in my day to day. So I would love to share that with all the listeners.
Yes, I'll include it. You could actually add it to your website, and then we could. I'm including the link to your website anyway. If you upload that infographic to one section of your website, I'm including your. I love the URL. The idea is in. Love it. I'm gonna put that on the episode when it goes out, and I'll also put your email address if you don't mind, so people could reach out to you and engage you. Joe, I really want to thank you for coming to my podcast and sharing your knowledge. And I'm sure the all the audience would learn a lot about it. And I'm looking forward to collaborating with you in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was great.
You're welcome. Relax.